Welcome back to another episode of The Social Web TV, the internet TV show that answers the question, who owns your data? With these two simple words, you do. And my, what an exciting episode we have. It's the birthday show.
Oh, I guess I'm birthday bear, so that's appropriate.
And we've got two birthdays. One, David Recording, happy birthday.
Thank you.
You're now legal to drink?
That was a year ago.
Right.
I'm still legal to drink.
All right. Well, we have to do something about that.
Yes.
And we've got a very special guest here because of the other birthday. We've got Mark Cantor joining us.
Howdy.
Co-author of The Bill of Rights, which has sat behind us for all these episodes and in many ways sort of underlined and inspired the work that we've been doing for the last year. It's hard to believe it's only a year in a way, given how much has happened, although...
September 4, a date that will go down in the history book. September 4, 2007 is when this document was created. Co-authored by these two gentlemen.
I remember when Joseph first came to me and said, well, no one's ever actually written this down. No one's ever said explicitly, this is what our rights are. And I went, wow, I mean, that's sort of like a Bill of Rights.
That's right. Yeah, that was really your idea to take it and run with it.
I get my stomach starts to curdle when there's too much dogma and organization and governance and bylaws and all this around organizations. And so I told Joseph, I said, look, if we can't come up with something immediately, like in the next 2 hours, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, you just jumped on your computer and started jotting that down,
But before you say it, I think you need to frame what was the world situation that was causing you to even want to write something.
Yeah, wasn't it someone around like Scoblegate and...
That was well before all that.
Oh,
yeah. So you have to rewind back to summer of 07,
a
tumultuous time in our nation's history. But no, so you had a real takeoff of social networks in general, but all in this sort of walled garden model. And then the first sort of a big splash there was Facebook's F8 platform, which was talking about opening things up, but it was really opening things up in the context of developing on Facebook. And there was, I think, a sort of new awareness from a lot of people that if you wanted to have friends across different services and start to have them work together, you as a user needed to be able to get your data and move them between things. But when we started talking about this, it seemed sort of very abstract or idealistic. I remember a lot of people that we talked to in industry and elsewhere were like, is this a real problem? Is this something users actually care about or even understand? Is this something they're going to want? And what do you really mean open? What's actually open and what's not? And so that was the sort of desire that came out of that to sort of say, well, can we just crisply state? I think we all held a very strong personal intuition about what a really open, user-centric social web would look like. But I sort of was just going around talking to everybody that I could about, is there something there? Am I crazy? How do we move this forward? And then it was going up to see you before the Data Sharing Summit where that really started to get real, and this then came out of that.
So Joseph's like singing my song. I mean, for years I had been simply standing up and asking, how can I as a user move my data out of your system?
And asking and asking and asking.
Yeah, and originally it was related to a format called FOF, because that was at least a file format that could hold this social graph. And this is actually before we even called it a social graph, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually where we first met in that FOF workshop in Galway way back in 2004. I mean, ahead of its time for sure.
So a year before that, I had met this guy named Jonathan Abrams. And he was bragging about Friendster and how he could lock in all these users and monetize them. And I said, dude, I mean, don't you think that the user's going to want to own their own and control their own data? He goes, no, I'm in charge. He even put a copyright on the bottom of every page, right? And I said, dude, I'm just going to commit my life to putting you out of business. and so many of these people, and all these VCs are flocking to this model because they love the idea of the users being the inventory. The inventory increases, you make more money off the users and the users, So I was always asking and standing up in public and asking the embarrassing questions like, well, wait a minute. And as I traveled around the world, users would come to me and say, hey, how come every time I show up, I got to register the same thing? How come if I invest and build this social capital inside of one of these walled gardens, how come they get to own it? Those are my relationships.
Right. And it's really hard for new services, too, that want to come and do something a little bit better or a little bit different to make users get yet another account, fill in all their profile, invite all their friends. Like, that's becoming a real tax on innovation. I think that's something that worried us all, too, as we all saw in the web, so many interesting new little startups and new little websites that could each have the potential to really take off, but you didn't have that drag of having to get all the data again the way you do.
Well, clearly what was going on was that though they were calling themselves Web 2.0, these were all Web 1.0 business models. This is classic lock-in, build up your list of users, establish your valuation based upon how many users you have.
Right.
And it's all these future potential exploitation that you can make off these users. The whole thing kept the company in the center of the equation. And what I learned from Doc Searls and Andre Durand is that we need to switch it. We need to put the user in the center of the universe.
Right.
And the second most important thing after the user is their friends and their families, right? Their relationships. And then you put all of capitalism on the outside, right? And that's getting it right.
So I've got some of your swag on a People Aggregator shirt. So if you're saying like switch around the business model, like how do you see like yourself making money off of this or others?
So the key thing here is that there needs to be, the battlefield is platforms, right? Plaxo's a platform, Six Apart's a platform. I'm pitching the BBC, the New York Times, everybody of these major players need to have their own platforms. Now, but People Aggregator allows you to have your own platform. It's kind of a reference design, and you can take it, you can get the source code in like an open source model and build your own platform. And every nonprofit out there, a government agency, all around the world will have their own platforms. Right now, we see Facebook and MySpace as the predominant platforms, but we're going from this horizontal model to these vertical niche networks where every kind of thing there is, every affinity will have its own network.
So sort of more like Ning?
Yes, Ning allows you in a very cookie cutter way to create your own network. Right now it's kind of simplistic. What we make our money is doing these more high-end systems where the client wants to have custom features and custom capabilities, but they still have the same standard stuff, which is inside of Plaxo Pulse, which is now being offered in movable type. Buddy Press is offering it with Word. This is all commodity now, right? And once something is a commodity and everybody's doing it the same way, that's when there should be a standard.
I think that's the point too, is that the real value is going to come not on who can get users to get over the hurdle of getting their information online in the first place, but then what do you do with that and how do you do something interesting? And I think we've seen so many interesting examples already of social travel, social reviews, social news. So, there's so many different interesting things you can do
Right.
where you're using the people as a lens to find information, to share experiences, and we're just getting started.
Now, Zuckerberg has the right model, right? I mean, that keynote he gave at F8 was the right vision. The problem is, it's a vision that you're locked into Facebook,
Right.
And he kept
Yeah.
saying with the rest of the web.
Right.
But if you listen carefully, at least as we were trying to code up Facebook
Yeah.
Connect, oh, surprise, surprise, I still can't get the emails.
Right.
Right?
No, yeah, it works perfectly if everyone in the world is a Facebook user,
Right.
and that's all the relationships.
Yeah.
But I think
We're getting there.
And so that's I think
they hit
where
100 million. But,
where I mean when we talk about the building blocks for the social web, sort of being able to go and start bringing them together to build experiences like Facebook Connect,
Right.
but using open technologies and being able to do it in a decentralized and distributed fashion. So I know like you've been painting on your fence sort of over the past year, putting together drawings with all these different technologies together. It looks like you've got
Sure. Okay, so I've been working on a book. It's called How to Build the Open Mesh. And some PowerPoint versions are up now. Next week, there'll be a blurb version, so you could buy a single one-off copy. Dan Farber's editing the words right now. It's kind of like a coffee table book. But the key thing is that it's a treatise for two kind of constituents. In fact, here at this table is the two constituents, right? There are the practitioners and the geeks who need to learn how to work together through working with open standards. Obviously, that's a big subject matter. But something we often don't talk about on this show are the marketeers. Because these poor guys like John have to actually explain this stuff to everybody else. Right?
Right.
This is a really complicated thing. Your other panelist, Chris Messina, has called it chaos. Right? It's not going to be one solution. It's not going to be one way of doing things. There's going to be lots of different things. And how they all intermix and connect together, I call the open mesh. Right? The idea is to leave some crumbs on the table for the small guys, the smaller companies, who can come in and bring their value, their value into the chain.
yeah.
Right? So anyway, so I call that the open mesh. I've got this treatise. We broke it up into a number of different chapters. Each chapter will be a wiki. People will come in and interact and exchange ideas. And the key thing is that there are a number of similar constructs, right? So we can all agree that there'll be something called people and places and events. And you're seeing huge ecosystems growing around that, upcoming and different things about events, different things about like Fire Eagle around location and Doppler, Eventful. I mean, all these new kind of services experiences. And as long as we can all agree to these things, we can then layer on and create these great experiences for the users.
Well, and we've seen some of this over the past year as well with like looking at platforms where Facebook put out F8 2 years ago now. And then in the past year, you've had Open Social come along and actually start to gain some really widespread adoption of going and taking something that was once very unique to Facebook and now sort of commoditizing it so that any social network can have it. I think that's sort of what you're saying as well, Mark, of it's not just going to be something like platform, but going to extend into all of these other aspects of social networks as well.
Think of them as these dimensions and planes. So, for instance, Joseph's working on something called portable contacts. Right? So now we can standardize and have one single set of code that can pull in all these different lists of friends and stuff. Okay, and then there might be Microsoft might come along and establish a new way to do synchronization through their live mesh. Or Google is establishing Open Social. And really, Facebook is kind of like this petri dish. Like they're so out ahead and they're pushing, they're defining new things. Right. Well, I'll just borrow off of them, right? So the idea is we're building on the shoulders of others and we're sharing these notions so we can all stand together and provide compelling experiences to users. I don't know any user who wakes up in the morning time saying, I'm now going to go use Google. I'm going to just use Facebook. I mean, they want to do an integrated experience and use whatever the hell they want to use.
So you think a year from now it's going to be seeing like the equivalent of Facebook Connect, but in a decentralized fashion that works across a bunch of different
Well, what I hope
networks?
is that there will be one or more dashboards that I can go there and configure my environment. So I have like a blog tool, a news reader, an activity reader, a media gallery. I configure it with my ID. These are all completely different vendors that are all inside of another vendor's wrapper. I'm sending out these little satellites and widgets that are my distributed self, and we're all learning how to work together. And the key thing is that there's monetization everywhere. We have to be able to make money to be able to put a roof over our heads. We can't be beholden to the VCs playing a crapshoot on us.
So really getting more to a model of where today you go to a site and you see a Facebook button and you log in with your Facebook account, which means that you can interact with a certain set of APIs, but moving more towards a world where you sign in with like an OpenID and then the services are able to discover here's where you put your photos, here's where you blog, right. Here's where you have your activities aggregated, all those different things to sort of take an experience like Facebook Connect into sort of all across the web.
Yeah, I mean, users want to use the tools that they prefer, and you want to be able to buy whatever kind of digital camera you want, and that you can still plug it into your computer and download your photos, and you want to still be able to take those photos and share them on the web, and if your friends don't happen to have an account on that same service, you still want to be able to share it with them. I mean, I think, in the spirit of the Bill of Rights, that's really the essence of what will just work for users. That we have to do all this complex technical and political stuff, but at the end of the day, it should sort of just work for users who want to get on and want to share things with people and don't want to have all of this, how come it works over here but it doesn't work over here, right? All that stuff just hurts everybody.
It's an interesting opportunity for the marketeers, right? So it's so confusing out there that let's say if a Best Buy came in and they want to promote the Geek Squad, so they're going to say, well, we're going to put together a solution that works end to nut, soup to nuts, and that gives them a sponsorship opportunity. Hadoop is doing that with Chris Messina, right? They're paying for his salary. Hadoop gets the credit, but yet they're enabling Dizzo.
Right. Cool. Well, it's 1 year from the birth of this document. You talked a little bit about how it came about. What sort of surprises have you had in terms of how this piece of rhetoric landed and what the reaction's been? Have you been pleased, disappointed, excited?
I've been pretty overwhelmed myself. I don't know about you guys, but given how in the early days there was a lot of questioning, are you guys crazy? Does anybody actually care about this? Certainly, are big companies really going to move around this? And now it's 1 year later, and you've got OpenID, you've got OAuth, you've got Open Social on all these sites, you've got big companies like Yahoo and MySpace and AOL being OpenID providers. You've got each company trying to figure out how to outdo each other. You've got Microsoft championing data portability in their contact APIs. You've got real contact APIs from all these different services to let you get your friends and move them around. And it seems like that momentum is as high now as it's ever been. And the world of going back to saying, no, we're just going to build yet another little walled garden, I think today is pretty untenable, whereas it was the norm just a year ago. So it's not that the Bill of Rights caused that, but I think that movement has, picked up steam and picked up power and energy faster than and more so than I would have definitely expected. So,
right. Well, clearly, open is the new black. Like, who would have thought that
right.
MySpace would have opened up if it wasn't for Facebook?
I actually created myself a MySpace account today. Like, it was
There
pretty
you go.
amazing.
Well, come over and friend me, and I'm.
Hey,
I'm
I
friends with
created
Tom,
one
too.
last week.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so the idea here is that the Pandora's box is opened up. We can't go backwards. We're going to be moving forward. Here's a great example. So when Mary Hodder found out about this, she went back to her EULA, her terms of service of her system, Dabble, and she changed the license so that every end user who came to the site, they retained ownership of all the data that they accumulated on that site. And then the terms of service gave a non-exclusive license of that data back to the service, right? So rather than assume that the service owns the data and maybe you can use it, it assumed that the user owns the data. And oh, by the way, since we're giving you this service, can we please use the data?
Right.
You know, it kinda
I remember the debate around
Right.
the table around that concept. It was so cool to see it in action. Well, we basically run out of time. It's been great. I think you guys deserve some congratulations. I think this document's been a lot more influential than what you've said. And to the question of the marketers, now we're seeing a steady drumbeat of announcements that are all about that transition from walled garden to this new model. And you hear echoes of the words in this Bill of Rights for users of the social web coming up again and again. It's the way that companies want to be perceived as being aligned with the concepts there. So
I want to tell one more story. So when Joseph and I were talking about like, what will happen if, right? And there was a scenario where Facebook was going to totally ignore us and continue to be really locked in. And Joseph and I had it all worked out. We were going to picket Facebook down on University Avenue with a bullhorn. They pull out the camera crew, you know, and like, we want our data. We want our data.
I'm so glad that didn't happen.
Yeah, for the marketers, I mean.
All right.
It's been a good year.
Yeah, to another great year.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
And happy birthday, David.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's been an exciting one. I hope you join us again next week for another exciting episode of The Social Web
TV!